they came to a common understanding which has been infused into the culture of our founding fathers. That's what this book is all about. That's amazing to me.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was probably singularly the discovery that made me say this book has to be written, because nobody had made this connection before that I could find anywhere on the internet. And in addition to that, I actually emailed, a couple dozen scholars and said, have you ever heard of this before? I mean, am I missing something? This seems to be, it seemed to have leapt off the pages of history at me.
Yes.
And it was this discovery that an academic by the name of Luxton, and this, before the internet was invented, had translated and annotated the book of the Kumayel, the council book of the Yucatec Maya, which was written over 500 years ago.
Ooh.
And in this, now I don't know if Mr. Luxton was a Christian, but the interesting point that he made that stood out to me was when he was translating Katun 13 Ahu, which is the final 13 countdown of the Mayan calendar, he picked up on the prophecies of the most important of all the Mayan prophets, the Chilambalam, the jaguar shaman, the most respected of their prophets. And he pointed out how he seemed to be outlining what Mr. Luxton called the Christian last judgment.
Ah.
And I thought, now this is a very interesting thing, that you have an academic, I don't know whether he's a Christian or isn't, but this is a scholarly work. And as he's translating a 500-year-old Mayan prophecy, he's viewing what the Mayan prophet is saying as parallel to the Christian last judgment. But then he says, then he points out how that the Chilambalam also focused on what he called the colonial count 1776, and a 13-stepped countdown ending in the year 2012. A Katun is 19.7 years. So if you take 1776, 19.7 years, 13 times, it ends in the year 2012. Well, Luxton was fascinated with that. It also fascinated me because, of course, you mentioned Nimrod and Osiris and Apollo. Well, the Great Seal of the United States of America has, in Roman numerals, 1776, a 13-stepped unfinished pyramid over which is hovering this portentous eye of the great architect of the universe, Osiris, Horus, Apollo, whom even not only have Freemasons, but U.S. presidents and vice presidents have admitted is a symbol of a Masonic god with a prophecy about his future return, which we can talk about that in a moment. But it was that symbolism that seemed to parallel identically what a 500-year-old Mayan prophet had said. And I wanted to know, were those who were responsible for the design of the Great Seal and the design and layout of Washington, D.C., were they familiar with those Mesoamerican beliefs? And if they were, did it influence these designs?
Great question, and I think you answered the question. In fact, this book makes me hungry for more. What a great beginning, because unless you have been accustomed to dealing in heavy symbology, and I think most of our audience does not go into the esoteric world, and we don't recommend it either. On the other hand, there are people who are heads of nations in Europe, in America, and you demonstrate in this book that they took to this dating system like a duck takes to water, and in fact put all of the elements of this system into our capital.
That's right.
It's amazing.
They did, and actually that was my first big quest was, is this just a magnificent coincidence?
Yeah.
Or was it intentional based on something they knew about the year 2012 and the Mesoamerican belief system? And so my next little thing, I had to kind of become a little bit of a private investigator to try to discover,
yes.
Is there some way I can prove concretely that they were not only aware of the Mesoamerican prophecy and their calendar, did they incorporate it into their belief system and the design and layout of Washington? And we were able to show that, of course, in 1854, the Jesuits in New York City, which were considered at that time to be kind of the power, if you will, in the Americas of the Vatican's interest in this country, and they were also coupled with the Freemasons. But they financed a trip for the official government painter, Constantino Brumidi, to travel to Mexico. To do what? To make copious notes of the Aztec calendar stone that ends in the year 2012, brought it back immediately on return, within days of his return, went to the U.S. Capitol, met with Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs, who was the supervisor over the construction of the Capitol Dome and the wings of the dome, and was commissioned to begin the painting inside the frescoes inside the rotunda and the hallways. And in any case, to make a long story short, of all the thousands of things he could have painted right inside the U.S. Capitol Dome, what does he paint? Cortez and Montezuma and the Aztec calendar stone that ends in the year 2012 right inside the U.S. Capitol building of all places. And in addition to that, he does some other subtle things, because he had worked for the Vatican and the Freemasons. So he paints Montezuma with his hand gesturing down towards the sacred fire that extinguishes in the year 2012.
Quick interruption, by the way. You have a picture of this in your book,
yes,
so that as people read about it, they can look at the picture.
That's right.
Yeah.
We actually put a picture of that scene from the frieze of American history in the book. We also included another picture of just the Aztec calendar stone by itself. And though we don't go into great detail, we point out how Tonatiuh, who is the Mayan god, or the Aztec god in the center of the Aztec calendar stone, was the god to whom literally tens of thousands of living blood human sacrifices were made, and at times that were directly related to the year 2012, meaning that at the end of certain cycles of the planetary systems, they'd put out the sacred fire, then relight it, but all almost in rehearsal of the end of the Mayan calendar in the year 2012, when the only inscription that we've been able to find out of Tortoquero, Mexico, refers to the return on that date of their underworld god, Bolan Yachtecu, who represents the 9 planets. But in all these other cultures, why did they do the same thing? They tied their gods to the Orion constellation, Osiris, the Pleiades, Apollo. And what appears magnificently is that these Freemasons were very much caught up into this belief system, incorporated it into the design and layout of Washington, D.C., and the Great Seal of the United States, which, of course, contains a very important prophecy.
On page 308 of your book, you talk about 2012 and the I Ching. What's the I Ching all about?
Oh, you know, now there's a summary portion of the book where I didn't want to repeat the research that others had done ahead of me, but also didn't want to just bypass it and not even mention it. The I Ching is an ancient Chinese device that they use for divining, maybe even for what you would think of today as kind of a Wall Street method for investing. But it would use a series of algorithms and numbers that the McKenna brothers developed around the I Ching, in which they were able to show that by using the King Wen series of the I Ching, it seemed to create spikes and low points throughout history when very important moments in time had occurred. This is very complicated. And the odd thing about this, Gary, is that McKenna used psychedelic drugs to put himself into a state of mind where he could get in contact with the forces.
Well, he became a shaman.
That's right. But as a result of doing it, he learned how to use the I Ching in a way that most of us had never heard of.
And the I Ching just sort of falls off the map here on this chart in 2012.
Yeah, and McKenna developed his system around this before the year 2012 was even being talked about, widely. And he was one of the first guys that wondered about the date 2012, because it shows kind of like a stock market graph, the lines going up and down in his system, plunges off the map into infinity in the year 2012.
Wow.
Then you write about 2012 and the WebBot project. How does that fit?
WebBot, was some smart guys thought, investing on Wall Street, often the market fluctuates based on people's faith in or lack of faith in the particular developments in industry, right? So these guys thought, here's what we can do. We can get online and we can pick up chatter, international chatter, and we can develop a program that will follow this chatter and that will determine where we should be making investments, because we're reading a lot of positive trends about one thing or negative. So they tried to kind of develop a system for investing on Wall Street. But then the WebBot almost seemed to kind of take on a mind of its own, in that it started making speculation that about 3 months, I think, before 9/11, that something spectacular was going to occur around that date, and then 9/11 occurred.